Imagine the scene. A two-seat open-top MG parked up in the square of a British market town. Probably some gent picking up a new bowler hat before retiring for a fish supper and a nice cup of tea. Just smash all those cliches together. Except this isn't your usual classic MG, and this is a very unusual village.
So what's going on here then? Well, this is MG's new Cyberster, a pure electric two-seat sports car. Now, this car's going to arrive well before the Polestar 6 or Porsche's electric Boxster, never mind the Tesla Roadster, and it's going to be a lot cheaper than all of those cars. So well done, MG. And this? Well, this is Thames Town, and it's very weird.
Yep, Thames Town is actually named after the River Thames, but it's in the Songyang district about 20 miles from the centre of Shanghai in China, which is odd because it looks vaguely like a British market town.
Georgian terraces.
But vaguely is probably the wrong word.
That is copied wholesale from Christchurch in Bristol. Shakespeare, obviously. Tudor? A big bronze statue of Winston Churchill. Hello, mate. Cobbled streets, Victorian terraces, red phone boxes, wine bars. It's like a panto version of Stevenage. Though the Cyberster actually isn't that weird. Okay, so it's probably a little bit strange.
But Thames Town wasn't the ideal place to test a car, so I headed out of Disney London. But Shanghai was freezing and smoggy, so up went the hood. And after about 3 hours of motorway and urban sprawl, we ended up in some more interesting geography. Roads that wound up mountains through epic bamboo forests. One of the beautiful bits of China.
So, the MG Cyberster. I know it sounds like an 8-year-old named it, but once you've got used to the fact that you're driving around in a car that sounds like a baddie from a cartoon, you'll find that this is quite a serious machine, mainly because it's not based on massive electrical compromise. Underneath it is either a 64 kilowatt hour or a 77, which should be good for around about 250 to 300 miles of range depending on the spec. There'll be 2- and 4-wheel drive, and the base model should start about £50,000 in the UK, which for this kind of thing is really good. And as for the way it looks, I kind of quite like it. It's actually a little bit bigger than I thought. And at the front, I can see shades of, I don't know, lots of different things. I have seen Alpine, there's a little bit of Porsche, a little bit of Jag. Everybody I speak to seems to think it's something a little bit different. It's quite long. I didn't expect it to be this long. And actually, these are 19-inch wheels, so it makes them look fairly decently sized, but not massive. So you get an idea of how big it is. It's sort of F-type sized, or just a little bit bigger than a BMW Z4. And then down the side, it's got a really quite pretty profile. I mean, I know it's red, I know it's 2-seat convertible, but if you look down the side of it, I like the way that the front rises up. And then they've coloured in this bit at the side black, so it gives it a little bit more of a slimmer shape. It kind of slims the car down on the way past. And then as you come over the back of the car, it's got a neat little ducktail. Just look at the profile. It's actually quite neat. And then at the rear, well, I have to say, I think that these sort of massive arrows on the rear, just underneath the big full width light bar, are a little bit on the nose for me. They are a bit cartoony, but the rest of it is really neat. It looks really good. A couple of little roll bars. It's a car that kind of feels like one of those computer game cars that you used to get where they were trying not to be sued for copyright. But saying that, I think it's really good looking. It's a lot better looking in the metal than I thought compared to the pictures I've seen. It's more proportioned and it just looks really nice. I just think it's really pretty, and the roof is really neat and really quick.
And it looks like this. One touch, maximum convenience.
There is one little bit of theatre that I like though, and that's the doors, because obviously they are scissor doors and they're electric. By the way, if you were wondering about what happens if you stand too close and get punched in the face by the door, they will never hit you. So if I put my face here, I'm betting on the fact this won't hit me in the face. And it actually works. Still, we're not just here to look at it. It's time for some driving. It's actually quite easy to get into, but before I drive, I better have a quick chat about the inside. Now, you shut the door by pressing this button here. All very smooth, very easy. And actually, there's quite a lot of space. The thing is, I was expecting something a little bit different, and this is interesting because if I was going to reinvent the classic MG Roadster for a digital age, I might have gone with some nice analog dials and a few buttons. This, the Cyberster, not a bit of it. You've basically got a massive wraparound set of screens in front of you, which are actually 3 different displays. Now, this side is entirely in Chinese, so I'm not really sure what it does, but I have seen it displaying things which I think are like mileage, your distance to empty, and your tyre pressures. Then on this side, you've got stuff to do with multimedia, so your radio, stuff to do with the phone, and in the middle is all the stuff to do with the car. So it all makes sense. It's incredibly clear. The software in this car is actually like a gaming computer, so it renders everything perfectly. All the little graphics and stuff, it looks like a cartoon. It is really, really good. Steering wheel is nicely positioned, looks pretty good. I mean, there are 2 paddles on the back. This side controls the modes, so you can switch into sport, normal, comfort, eco, all the usual stuff. This side does the regenerative braking. So if you pull that, you get a little bit more regenerative braking. Then the usual buttons on here. There's a little button marked Super Sport, which is kind of an overboost button. So if you're doing an overtake, you can hit that. The dial lights up red and makes a whooshing noise like a computer game, and then it gives you a little bit more power. As you move round the car, the thing you notice is that it actually feels really well put together. You know, you have your suspicions about things, but then when you get in this has been pretty well done. I mean, the stitching all lines up, everything, there's no panel gaps. This is really good. In the middle here, you have all the drive controls. So drive's at the bottom, neutral, reverse, and park. And you can actually feel them by touch. You don't have to look at them to know which gear you're in, which is actually really nice. And then next to the gear selector is an extra screen, and that's basically just for the air conditioning and the comfort settings. The roof controls here, one touch, it's a fast roof, we've already seen that, and then there's a little slot for your mobile phone here, a couple of cup holders, and in here is a little bit of storage, but it's also got your USBs, so there's a lightning and a SD card and some other bits and bobs. Also, little things I've noticed, the seats look really cool. You know, the seats are really comfy and they actually look really nice, so when you look into the car, you actually think that looks like a nice thing. And there's an optional yoke with a variable rack, which I think might be a bit weird because a normal steering wheel is really what you want if you're going to drive quickly. A yoke is a bit strange. There is a little bit of storage behind the seats, and there's kind of a little flappy thing here. It's got a flap on it because obviously the doors open upwards, so otherwise everything would fall out of it. But you don't really need it because the boot's actually quite big. General terms, I think some of the colourways are a little bit strange. This kind of sort of reddish colour makes it look a little bit cheaper than it actually is. If this was in black leather, it would look super classy. Generally though, massively impressed. I really like the insides. Now I have to drive.
Okay, so enough teasing, it was actually time to drive. And as it turns out, China has some amazing country roads. Roads that are as spectacular as anything we've got in Europe, except just that little bit different. And the Cyberster finally ended up in its element.
So, the driving part of the MG Cyberster, which is what we've all been waiting for. Well, my first impressions, it's really rather good, but it's more like a sporty GT car than an out-and-out sports car, and that is no bad thing. I mean that as a compliment. So there's going to be 2 versions. This one is a single motor rear-wheel drive car with about 335 brake horsepower, and this will get from 0 to 62 in about 5.2 seconds, which is kind of nicely rapid. Then there will be a dual motor which straps a 201 brake horsepower motor to the front to give 536 brake horsepower, and that's a lot quicker, so that'll do 0 to 62 in about 3.2 seconds, which is a lot more naughty. Now both cars, hairpin bend, both cars will get to about 124 miles an hour, which is probably irrelevant for most people. And generally, the one with 335 brake horsepower, this one, actually feels quite sprightly. The steering's a little bit sort of numb, so you don't really know what the front wheels are doing. But it's got plenty of grip and actually quite good body control. It rides quite well on the motorway, which is where I've been driving it. And that led me to believe that it might not have very much body control. But actually it's pretty good. It's not got the most feel in the world, that's the problem. I think it could be a lot more feelsome. It's really pretty up in the hills. I thought Shanghai was a bit of an urban kind of monstrosity, but this is so beautiful. We've just come about 3.5 hours outside of Shanghai and up onto these mountain roads, and it's really pretty, and they're actually quite nicely surfaced. They're good driving roads. Weirdly, I think 300 horsepower in this car in rear wheel drive is probably enough. Just enough to start to get it to move around, but not enough to scare yourself. Weirdly though, I think it's like with all of these battery electric cars, they will always have to work with or around the weight. Now, this is just a single motor with a 64 kilowatt hour battery with about, when I charged this up, 100% said 250 miles. Now, the two motor car with 536 brake horsepower weighs nearly 2 tons. So even though you've got a lot of power, you're always having to play with the mass, and it's something you can't get away from. I think this one is more like just a bit more than an F-Type. Now, an F-Type, a chunky F-Type with an internal combustion engine, weighs something like 1,600 kilos rather than 1,900 and some. So there's a lot of fattiness in a car like this, but this Cyberster seems to cope with it really well, and it's actually quite quick.
You know what? An electric convertible plaything is actually a good idea. A lot of these cars don't have massively characterful engines anyway. I'm thinking Mazda MX-5. So such usable power is excellent, and the general quiet really isn't that big of a deal. It's a different experience rather than a worse one.
Now you can change the modes, so if you play with this paddle here, you can do comfort, sport, and also custom. But when you changed it, the graphics do loads of really cool things. So when you're in sport, the wheels catch fire on the graphic. When you're in custom, it's got like electricity going over the wheels. And then there's this little button here that says Super Boost, which just gives you a little bit of extra power for a short amount of time, but it makes loads of funny noises. You just hear it messing around all the time. It's like it is a bit computer gamey, but you know what? It drives really, really well. I'm actually having quite a good laugh, and it's quiet. I don't really miss an engine note. And the weird thing is, this is a Chinese domestic market car, so a lot of this stuff, if you wanted it a little bit sharper, could actually be engineered in it for the UK. So what the Chinese did was, when the MG4 came to the UK, it was called the Mulan in China and was handling slightly differently. So they got some British engineers to tune it up for the UK market, and they made it a really decent handling car. They could do exactly the same with the Cyberster. If we have a slightly different feel or texture that we want from the car, they can engineer it in. But the basics of this car, what I'm driving right now, isn't bad at all. It's slightly soft, there's slight amounts of body roll, the steering could be slightly sharper and a bit more feelsome, but this is a very neutral, kind of relaxing car to drive quickly. I'll be honest here, I'm more impressed with the Cyberster than I thought it was going to be. It's genuinely neat, it doesn't feel as heavy as it is, it's got plenty of grip. Okay, so when you hit the brakes, it does dive a little bit. There's a little bit of body roll. Look, if I hit the brakes, you are getting a little bit of front end dive. I have been making the front tyres lock up slightly on these mountain roads sometimes. It could be harder, it could be sharper, but then when I was driving on the motorway, I quite enjoyed the compliance. I enjoyed the fact that it wasn't an out and out hardcore, you know, like Lotus Exige or something. This is really good. This is really good.
But eventually, we had to head back into Shanghai to give the Cyberster back. And after a bit more charging, which is excellent by the way and produced an average of 90 kilowatts, a bit more freeway and a lot more time, we ended up back in the urban sprawl in a car that can absolutely stand on its own. A car that really doesn't need to hark back to MG heritage or classic British two-seater cliches to be what it is. A currently unique, fun and interesting electric car.
So, the new MG Cyberster. What's our verdict? Well, I have to say that I don't think this is actually a sports car. I think in any of the versions they may be fast, but they're a little bit too heavy and a bit too soft for that. But what it is something completely unique right now, and that is a two-seat pure electric drop-top GT car. I've really enjoyed driving this car about, and given that the competition is likely a few months away and going to cost twice the price of this thing, you have to give MG kudos for that. This has been a gentle, calming, not very exciting, but generally quite nice version of what a convertible should be. I think it's really rather good.